About a month back, I made my first video on Young Justice. I wasn't expecting a big response. I was really just trying to support the More Young Justice hashtag, but well, that video ended up being by far my best performer in about 4 months. And that video was all about an episode from season 1 named Failsafe, and why, in retrospect, it's a much more significant chapter of the Young Justice story than it seems. I mentioned in that video that I had no idea what the fan consensus was on Failsafe, but personally, I thought it was a great episode. And when that video hit the algorithm and comments from Young Justice fans came pouring in, I learned that while Failsafe is viewed as a highlight of the show, that's due in part to what it does to set up the next episode. The episode my comment section was calling the best episode of Young Justice. And that's an episode named Disordered. In this episode, individual members of the team, traumatized from the failed simulation of Failsafe, attend a series of counseling meetings with Black Canary, while Superboy has a bit of an adventure with the Forever People. In this video then, we're going to take a closer look at Disordered, and ask the question, why do so many people view this as the best episode of Young Justice?
Hurting. Try traumatized.
The most obvious place to start looking for an answer is with, well, you guys. Looking through the comments on that last video, the ones mentioning Disordered, one idea that pops up more than any other is that what makes this episode so good is the way it covers the fallout and trauma from Failsafe. The story in which the team and everyone they love are killed off one by one inside a botched training simulation, and in which the team are convinced that everything's happening for real. The dominant opinion seems to be that it's the therapy scenes in Disordered which make the episode great, and particularly the way these scenes break down and reveal so much about our characters. But is that the whole story? I don't think so, not quite. So let's take a closer look at the episode and see if we can figure out just what works so well here. We open in a shaken and distressed Mount Justice. The team are not themselves, and Batman's confused why they haven't shaken off the events of Failsafe just yet.
I know our virtual reality training simulation went badly, but I'd hoped the team would have rallied by now.
Trauma tends to linger.
Now, Martian Manhunter's right, of course, trauma tends to linger, but that's not all of it. I want to make 2 points about the trauma shown by each member of the team in this episode, and how Disordered navigates these traumas. First, I'd like to point out that the damage we see in our young heroes isn't just from the events of Failsafe. Failsafe only brought this damage to the surface. The second point I want to make, though, is that this episode doesn't just break our characters down, analyze their flaws and their traumas. It moves our characters past them, or starts to at least. To show you what I mean, I'd like to go through each of the team in turn, and demonstrate how their scenes in Disordered illustrate these 2 points. Let's start with Artemis. The Archer extraordinaire is resistant to counseling, protesting to Black Canary that since her faux death was the cause of the issues in Failsafe, she herself wasn't actually affected. But despite this, it's obvious to us and Canary that Artemis is not fine. She's guarded and on edge, but the thing is, she's right. This isn't because of Failsafe. It's due to her ongoing anxiety, doubt, and self-loathing stemming from the secret she's been holding. Both the secret Canary knows about, that she's Sportsmaster's daughter, and the one Canary doesn't, that Artemis let Cheshire evade capture, out of fear that the team would learn her own identity. It's only now that the rest of the team's been rattled that Artemis's own issues have come under scrutiny. In reality, they predate the simulation fiasco by a long time. But moving to my second point, I think this episode does see Artemis begin to move past this harmful pattern of isolation and secrecy.
You're too tough to need help. Whatever. Maybe. Or maybe too tough to admit you need help. Artemis, it's not a sign of weakness to open up to your friends.
Canary originally suggests that Artemis isn't open with the team because she thinks it would make her look weak, and given Artemis's upbringing, it's fair enough that Canary thinks this is the issue. But we see her realize shortly after that this isn't the heart of the matter.
Right. Can you imagine what Wally would do with that?
Interesting. So, the person you're most worried about is Wally.
It's made apparent that Artemis is shutting herself off because she's scared that the team would reject her if they knew about her parentage, or that she let Cheshire go. Artemis's way of coping with this has been to try and close herself off emotionally from her teammates. But we see in this moment that she cares for Wally deeply. We see Canary realize this, and we also see that Artemis hadn't necessarily even realized this herself. A few episodes later, we see that Artemis does indeed come clean about everything. Her trust and her care for her teammates overrode her fears. and she's accepted for all of it, leading to the largely healthier Artemis of later seasons. And I think we see a pivotal moment in that journey here in Disordered, when Artemis is confronted by the strength of her bond with Wally. Given the way her journey eventually pans out, I think it's safe to call this moment a big step forward. Speaking of Wally though, let's move on to Kid Flash. It seems he's coping well, suspiciously well, until Canary brings up the death of Artemis.
So you really have no interest in confronting your extreme reaction to Artemis's death?
I'd rather talk about you, babe.
This scene is really interesting to me because of the way Wally defaults into the womanizing, braggadocious mode we've seen from him previously, after Canary mentions his reaction to Artemis's death, specifically because of the way we see Wally panic for a second before entering this state. That tells us that despite appearances, Wally is anything but distraught. As Canary points out, Wally's in denial and is adopting an unfazed facade in an attempt to maintain control of his mind and his emotions. But if this facade is the one Wally adopts to feel in control, then that suggests that all of the other times Wally's acted in a similar way throughout the season were motivated by similar feelings of insecurity. And if that's true, that's massive, and it's a really interesting comment on the links between juvenile behavior and emotional struggles. This interpretation is perhaps backed up by a comment by Bear later in the episode.
Lower beings tend to fear intimacy.
Given this line, and given just how much more mature and sincere Wally seems in the show's second season, it seems reasonable to speculate that Wally's therapy scene in Disordered suggests that a fair amount of Season 1 Wally's more abrasive qualities come from a fear of genuine emotional intimacy with the team as a whole and with people like Artemis in particular. There's nothing wrong with being a clown, but when considered alongside Wally's startling Season 2 sincerity, Disordered suggests that this aspect of Wally's personality was never coming from an authentic place. And as for my second point, that Disordered sees all our characters begin to move in healthier directions, we see Wally accept that his blasé state is a form of denial.
Wally, you're in denial.
I'm comfortable with that.
Sure, he says he's comfortable with that, but what has this scene told us, if not that the comfortable demeanor Wally's been defaulting to is a front? If nothing else, then this scene shows us Wally starting to confront his own, perhaps inadequate coping mechanisms. And even if he's not made any progress by the end of the episode, he clearly goes on to outgrow this attitude before too long. And now we start to get to the really meaty bits of the episode, so let's talk about Calderam. Aqualad is distressed after believing himself to have failed as a leader in the simulation.
I was the general, but behaved like a soldier and sacrificed myself. I am not fit for command and must resign as team leader.
This is another moment where the trauma of Failsafe reopens existing insecurities in the team. Calder's struggled with accepting the mantle of leadership previously, since way back in episode 4. So the guilt of his decision-making in the simulation, even though by its very nature he could never have beaten it correctly, only compounds these existing anxieties. Calder even tries to resign the mantle of leader, but after Canary asks who he'd nominate to take up his position, Aqualad realizes that he remains the best candidate.
Artemis is too raw and untrusting. Kid Flash too rash and impulsive. Miss Martian remains too eager to please. Superboy carries too much anger.
Making Robin the logical choice.
I cannot shift this burden to him. Not yet. It appears I must withdraw my resignation.
What we see here then, even more clearly than any of the previous scenes, is a character moving forward. This isn't merely the show breaking down Calder's insecurities, it's Calder reaffirming his faith in his own leadership. He realizes that while he may not be the perfect leader, nobody is the perfect leader, and that for now, he is the best leader the team could have. It's not an instant solution to Calder's insecurities, but instant solutions rarely exist. And this is a more genuine, more realistic beat anyway. Calder needs to keep working at his confidence issues, needs to keep trying to be the best he can be, but in this scene, we see him make that choice to keep on fighting. And yeah, it pays off, as by the third season, he's become the co-chair of the entire league. And sure, in that season, you could argue that the leadership he displays and the decisions he makes aren't perfect, but he's clearly made progress from this scene in Season 1. Robin's scene is a bit heavier than Calder's, but I do think there are some similarities to be drawn. Dick's experiences within the simulation have made him come to a realization.
I always expected to grow up and become him. And the hero bit, I'm still all in. Inside of him, the thing that drives him to sacrifice everything for the sake of his mission. That's not me.
Being the next Batman, the man who helped raise the orphaned Dick, the man he clearly idolizes.
You can't tell Batman.
That isn't what Robin wants. That isn't who he is. He's not prepared to put the objective above his friends. This is traumatic for the poor kid. I mean, think about it. Robin's like 13 at this point, and he's realizing that the one rock, the one anchor around whom he rebuilt his life after his parents died, he can't follow him the way he thought he could. Because of that, this scene is hard to watch, but it's also cathartic. Because while we're seeing Dick struggle, this struggle is a necessary one, and he's better off for it. While realizing that he doesn't want to be Batman is in some ways a negative beat, it's also a really positive one. After all, what is this if not Robin reclaiming and reaffirming his humanity, and the bonds he's made with other people? Realizing that he can't put the mission above the safety of his adoptive family means that he's a healthy person who can be an authentic part of society in a way Batman kind of can't anymore. And I think it's fairly clear in this scene that Failsafe hasn't changed Robin fundamentally. This is a realization, not a shift in character. That means that, like the other examples we've discussed up until this point, Failsafe isn't the root of Robin's trauma. It's more the catalyst, causing a pre-existing and buried issue to spring to the surface. And also, like the other examples, facing this issue is tough, but Robin does face it, and moves forward, grows, self-actualizes as a result. At the close of this episode, Robin knows himself better, exists more authentically than he did before Failsafe. But while Robin makes a good deal of progress in Disordered, the same isn't as true for the next hero, Miss Martian. She doesn't move past her trauma, not just yet. But I think the episode does see her figure out how to better approach the task.
But not being yourself is never the answer, and won't make your feelings of guilt go away.
M'gann is scared to embrace her true self, both physically and psychically. The latter is a direct result of Failsafe. She's loath to use her powers again after they involuntarily put the team in mortal danger. But as Canary points out, this is tied to her self-image issues, the way she's afraid to be herself. We see this in the scene as she unconsciously becomes Caucasian, but she's been hiding her true white Martian appearance for far longer, as we discover a few episodes later. Her psychic anxieties are prompted by Failsafe, but the reason she's so ready to distrust herself, so ready to hide in her human Megan disguise in response, that's tied to her pre-existing hang-ups. Does this scene show her making progress against these issues though? Well, it's hard to say, but I think there is a way to interpret her conversation with Canary as one which contributes to her ultimate self-acceptance. This is the first time anyone's pointed out to M'gann that control over her dangerous psychic strength and acceptance of her Martian self are two sides of the same coin. And a few episodes later, we see M'gann embracing this link in order to beat Simon in a psychic showdown, and it's very shortly after this victory that she reveals her white Martian form to the team. So even if the relevance of the counseling scenes in Disordered is less obvious when thinking about M'gann's journey compared to a character like Robin's, I think you can definitely read this scene as equally a pivotal moment. And last but certainly not least, we get to Superboy. His is perhaps the most complex case, as we see not one but two counselling scenes with Black Canary, which bookend the episode, and in between these, he's off on a caper with the so-called Forever People. When I revisited this episode, my first impression was that this A story was fairly lightweight compared to the dark, broken scenes at Mount Justice. That this was a bright, flashy adventure with two purposes: to offset somewhat the sense of melancholy elsewhere in the episode, and to begin introducing the new Genesis Apocalypse lore for the future of the show. But after I rewatched it, I came across a couple more interesting points in this new God's diversion. Connor has two issues which come out in his conversations with Canary, and I think we see him begin to move past both during this adventure. These issues are his utter refusal to open up, to share his anxieties and pains, which we see at the start, and his all-consuming desire to know what it's like to be Superman, the role he was bred for, a desire so powerful it threatens to overwhelm his sense of self and the bonds he's made.
See, from the moment I first opened my eyes in that Cadmus pod, there's been one thing I've wanted and feared. To know what it is to be Superman.
It's quite clear in retrospect that the first of these, I think, is solved in part during Connor's time with the Forever People, showing Connor interacting with a super team so close, so in sync, so united that they literally become one, juxtaposes ironically with the state of disarray we see back at the cave. This juxtaposition maybe also serves as a symbol to Connor, showing him that a harmonious team relationship is attainable if he follows Bear's aforementioned advice and stops being afraid of emotional intimacy. Connor makes a step in precisely this direction at this story's close.
To you, she's merely technology.
No, it's not like that!
Then what is it like?
We bonded, okay?
But this scene with Sphere is also an important part of another puzzle. I think it serves as the conclusion of a mini-arc Connor has in this episode. See, when he's introduced to the Forever People, he's unsure what name to give, but he settles on Superboy. Given what we learn later about Connor's time in the simulation fulfilling his taboo desire to be Superman, this moment suggests that in the wake of Failsafe, part of Connor is still pursuing that identity.
We shall follow your lead.
Hence why he picks the less personal, more Kryptonian identifier. But when he reaches out to Sphere at the episode's end, he's not just embracing the supercycle, he's also embracing the team. Because the experiences Connor's had with Sphere have been as Connor, as the version of himself which M'gann, Wally, Robin, Calder, and Artemis helped birth back at Mount Justice. Sphere came from a team mission after all, and by this point functions almost as an emblem of the covert squad, at least to Connor. So Connor's able to come clean to Canary at the episode's end thanks in part to this choice, a symbolic affirmation of his bond with the team over his hidden Superman desire. So that's everyone, but what does all this tell us? Well, in each case, while Failsafe rocked our heroes, it wasn't ever the events of the simulation itself that lay at the roots of their traumas. Failsafe brought each issue to the surface, sure, but their origins all go way back, and have been driving some of our heroes like Superboy or Artemis for as long as we've known them. That's why they're so shaken, Batman. But maybe more interestingly, it also tells us that this episode doesn't just reveal or analyze the damage or emotional baggage each hero carries. In every case, albeit to different extents, our heroes confront and surpass these mental barriers. They begin to rip up these deep-rooted traumas. That's what's at play in Disordered. Not merely deep, cutting character analysis, but character development, real development, changes that matter, and that we get to see going forward. In every one of these dark moments, there's a bright, optimistic core, even if some are more hidden than others. People talk about character development a lot, but rarely are characters in serialized dramas actually developed, built through struggle in a way as real or graceful as we see in this episode. That is what made Disordered special and why it worked so well. I hope you've enjoyed my little look at this episode, and I hope some of these readings, these interpretations, are fresh to you. Let me know what you thought below, and if you'd like to see more Young Justice content, because I'd be thrilled to make it. I want to thank all my patrons on screen now, especially Kevin Douglas and Ian Fifield. You're all crash, and if this video had you feeling the mode, don't forget to give it a like. But that's all, so thanks and bye.